Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever the time is, wherever you are. Today we are going to talk rums yet again. And the rum we're going to talk about today is review number 1070, which I just published. And it hails from Australia, actually in the south of Australia, in Melbourne, not too far from another little distillery we're going to get to sooner or later called Jimmy Rum. The rum itself came to me via Mr. and Mrs. Rum's incredible advent calendar for 2023, which I finally got, like you wouldn't believe how much trouble that took, through the kind offices of Steve McGarry, who literally muled it to Canada for me. And it's the second edition because the first one was made in 2021, then it got issued in 2022. I managed to pick up one of those in Germany and I wrote about them. And if it's one thing those things taught me is that there is an incredible small distillery culture in Australia that developed almost under our complete sightline, largely because they only sell it down there and there's very little exported outside. We know about Bundaberg, of course, and we know about Bainley, and there may be one or two others by lucky people who go out and about and back and forth, but the rest of us don't know anything about it. So in this sense, the Advent calendar proved to be a huge boon to us. So the Boatrocker Distillery and Brewers started out by the good efforts of Matt Houghton, who had a lifelong passion. Apparently it came about as a result of watching some show by a guy called Michael Jackson. No, not that Michael Jackson, another one. And he actually studied this in university, and he kept doing gypsy brewing in his own spare time and did some fairly well-regarded beers, apparently. But then he and his wife finally in 2012 bought property, plant, equipment, the whole 9 yards, and set up a little distillery called Boatrockers. Now, I must tell you that as far as I'm concerned, their general thing seems to be more whiskies and of course gins, as always, because of the 2-year rule, so they had to make the cash flow. Rum seems to be something of a separate thing, but they did make a very interesting batch number 3 in 2021. This one that we have here, this is the actual sample that I have, is a double barreled rum batch 4. So this is the one, of course, from the most current advent calendar. And they do use a Jamaican kind of technique where they actually have a muck pit, and they use the dunder and they kind of like supercharge their wash in order to get a slightly higher ester count. And what comes out of the other end of their hybrid column still, they use 1 column of a 2 column still, and I think it was about 5 plates of it. And then they run it through and then they age it for the requisite 2 to 3 years in 2 different kinds of barrels. I think one of them is ex-bourbon and the other one is a kind of like a sherry cask, I believe. I can't remember precisely. I'll get to it and I'll put it in the show notes. The point I'm trying to make, though, is that there is a valid series of experiments going on here that make the rum quite interesting. This one in particular has a nose that it just won't quit. I mean, it's at 45%, so it's not going to damage you in any way, but it is going to be quite pleasant. You're going to get a lot of fruits, a lot of bitter chocolate. There's some sawdust, there's some tannic notes. There are very light fruits, cherry syrup, a little bit of apricots, a little bit of crushed almonds, that kind of toasted bread / wet sawdust kind of thing. And that is both on the nose and on the palate. So the issue for me for this rum, which is, as I say, is batch number 4, is that it starts to fall off after you have the nose. So you smell it and you have a really good thing about it, and then the palate just doesn't seem to quite measure up to the standards that the nose set. The nose is really quite pungent, quite rich for 45%, but then it just kind of goes thin and bitchy and nasty, and you still get some of those chocolate oranges and some crushed walnuts and some tannics and so on, as well as some chocolate and perhaps some creamy notes like yogurt and so on. But overall, it's thin and it doesn't quite present very well. And in point of fact, in comparison to batch number 3, which I quite liked, I think I scored that one 82 or 83 points. Here, what we have is stuff that just doesn't seem to quite gel and come together harmoniously, if you will. It's a subtle kind of thing, but I really do believe that. And I did check my back and forth with my previous notes to make sure that I wasn't kind of like bullshitting you about any of this. So overall, when you want to summarize it, this is an interesting sipping rum that's just about 3 years old. You can, of course, mix it. It does have some character. It does have some Jamaican background to it, which is really kind of sweet. But at the end of the day, it seems more like unrealized potential, which is exactly what I said about batch number 3. There is good stuff here. It's not as good as batch number 3. It still has a ways to go, but I'm living in hope that by the time we get to batch number 5 or 6, this thing is going to seriously take off, and I hope so. I'm scoring this at 80 points. I hope at some point some other people will chime in and see whether they like it or not, but for the moment, for today, this is it. I hope you enjoyed the review, and we'll see you the next time. Bye-bye.